of strange orgies. The inventor and Dryer stood in a corner of the room and watched in silence. In the center of the brightly illuminated floor, a plump little figure about 1.5 feet tall, tightly bundled in brown sackcloth and left exposed only a pair of short blood-red legs, made of some substance resembling rubber, and stood in baby boots with buttons, walked back and forth with a very natural human-like motion, swaggering a wee bit, and turning at every tenth step with a built-in little cry between hep and help, meant to disguise the slight creak of its mechanism. Dryer, hands clasped on his stomach, watched with soft emotion, as sentimental visitor watches a child, perhaps his own little bastard, to whose first toddle he is being treated by a proud mother. The inventor, who had let his beard grow and now looked like an oriental priest in mufti, kept tapping his foot lightly in time to the movements of the little figure. "Goodness," said Dryer, suddenly in a high-pitched voice, as if he were ready to burst into tears of tenderness. The hooded gnome did in fact walk about very catchingly. The brown cloth was only there for decency's sake. Afterwards, when the mechanism had died, the inventor unwrapped his prototypical automaton and laid bare its works, a delicate system of joints and muscles, and 3 small but remarkably heavy batteries. One thing about this invention could be discerned, even in its first crude model. What impressed one was not so much those electrical ganglia and the rhythmic transmission of current as the springy, somewhat stylized, but wonderfully wife-like gait of the mechanical infant. Paradoxically, it paced the floor more like a meditating mathematician than a babe in the wood. The secret of motion lay in the flexibility of Voskin. The very special stuff of the inventor had replaced live bones and live flesh. The 2 pseudopodia of this original Voskity seemed alive not because it moved them. A mechanized Strolly or Jivulia are after all no rarity. They breed like rabbits on sidewalks around Easter or Christmas, but rather because the material itself, animated by a so-called galvanobiotic current, remained active all the time, rippling, tensing, slackening, as if organically alive or even conscious. A double ripple grating into triple dapple with the smoothness of reflections in water. It walked without jerking. This was the wonder of it, and it was this that Dryer appreciated most, while reacting rather indifferently to the technical mystery imparted to him first in code and then in coded explanation of the code by the cagey inventor. What is it sex? Can you tell me?" asked Dryer, as the brown little figure stopped before him. "Not differentiated yet," answered the inventor, "but in a month or 2 there will be 2 males and 1 female over 5 feet high. In other words, the infant had to grow up. It was necessary to create not only a semblance of human legs, but also the semblance of a graceful human body and expressive face. The inventor, however, was neither an artist nor an anatomist. Dryer therefore found him 2 helpers, an old sculptor whose work was so lifelike that he managed to convey the impression of acute chorea, for example, or say the beginning of a sneeze, and a professor of physiology who, in trying to explain the well-known capacity of waking up at a self-imposed hour, had written a long treatise which explained nothing but contained the first description of self-awareness of muscles, with beautiful illustrations of color. The workshop soon began to look as if those medical students had again been horsing around with dismembered cadavers. The professor of anatomy and the fantastic sculptor assisted the inventor very successfully. One was lean, pale, nervous, with long hair combed back and a huge Adam's apple. The other was sedate and bald, and wore a high-starched collar. Their appearance afforded Dryer a source of endless delight. Since the first was the professor and the second the artist, he could now clearly imagine the full-grown, perfect, elegantly dressed automaticons walking back and forth on a huge bay window of the emporium, among potted plants, discreetly disappearing to change their clothes behind the scenes, and stalking in again to the light of the populace. It was a poetical vision, no doubt a lucrative enterprise. In mid-May he bought the patent rights from the inventor at a comparatively low price, and now he was debating what would be better, to create a sensation on the Kurfürsten Dam by putting those figures literally into circulation, or to sell the invention to a foreign syndicate. The former was richer fun, the latter safer profit. As happens in the lives of many businessmen, he began to feel that in the spring of 1928 that his affairs somehow or other were assuming a certain independent existence. The part of his funds that was in a state of constant fruitful gyration moved by momentum, and moved too rapidly. He seemed to be losing control over his wealth, seemed no longer to be able to stop this great golden wheel at will. Half of his fortune was reasonably safe, but the other, which he had created in a year of freakish luck, at a time when luck, a light touch, and a special kind of imagination were needed, had now become too lively, too mobile, An optimist by nature, he hoped that this was but a temporary loss of control, and did not for an instant suppose that the increased spin might transform the wheel of fortune into the shimmer of its gyration, and that if he stopped the wheel with his hand, it would prove to have been nothing but his own golden ghost. But Martha, who now more than ever loathed her husband's whimsical levity, even though it had once helped him to become rich, could not help feeling that he might dance his way into some financial disaster before she was able to remove him and halt the light-hearted spin herself. The store was doing good business, but the profits did not accumulate as solidly as they should have. The stock market had recently given a sudden shiver. He had gambled on it and lost, and now was gambling again. And all this Martha saw a doomful admonition. She might have been willing to grant him a reprieve from some solid deal, for she admitted that she trusted his scent, but the juggling with shares was too risky. Why procrastinate when every passing month might mean a further dwindling of wealth? On that sunny and terrible morning, as soon as she and Franz returned from the tennis club, she led him to the study to show him the revolver. From the threshold she indicated with a rapid glance but a barely perceptible motion of the shoulder of the desk at the far end of the room. There in a drawer lay the instrument of their happiness. "In a moment you'll see it," whispered Martha, and glided toward the desk, but at that instant Tom entered the room with a bold, buoyant step. "Get that dog out of here," she said to Franz. "I can't do anything with the dog here. Out!" cried Martha. Tom laid back his ears, extended his gentle gray muzzle, and slunk behind a chair. "Oh, get him out," said Franz, through clenched teeth with a convulsive shudder. Martha clapped her hands. Tom slipped beneath the chair and emerged on the other side. She gestured threateningly. Tom jumped back in time and, licking his chops with a hurt expression, trotted toward the door. On the threshold, he looked back, one front paw raised. Martha, however, was coming at him. He submitted to the inevitable. She slammed the door shut. An obliging draft promptly banged the window pane. "All right, now let's hurry," she said crossly. "Why are you sulking there? Come here." She quickly yanked open the drawer. She lifted the brown briefcase. Under it, a gleaming object showed. Franz mechanically extended his hand and took it. He turned it this way and that. "Are you sure?" he began apathetically. He heard Martha snort and looked up. She uttered a dry laugh and walked away. "Put it back," she said, standing at the window and driving on the pane. No wonder Willie had laughed. "I said put it back. You see perfectly well it's a cigar lighter." "Yes, of course, but really quite like a little revolver. Very fancy, isn't it? I think I saw a couple of them at the store." Noiselessly he shut the drawer. That day Martha realized a saddening thing. Until then she had thought she was acting no less judiciously than she had acted or wanted to act all her life. Now she saw that some kind of atrocious dreamland was encroaching upon her charts. A beginner's self-confidence might be pardonable, but that pardonable phase had come and gone. All right, she should never have accepted to marry that clown with the foul-smelling monkey in his arms. All right, she should not have been impressed by his money. She should not have hoped in her youthful naivete to make an ordinary, dignified, obedient husband out of that joker, but at least she had arranged her life in the way she wished. Almost 8 years of grim struggle. She wanted to take her to Ceylon or Florida, if you please. Instead of buying this elegant villa, she needed a sedentary husband, a subdued and grave husband. She needed a dead husband. These were the days. There were several days when she retired, as it were, into remotest deserts of her spirit to review her blunders and collect her forces so as to return purified to the task, and thenceforth commit none of the former errors. Elaborate combinations, complicated details, bloody weapons, all this was to be abandoned. From now on the motto would be simplicity and routine. The sought-for method must be absolutely natural, absolutely pure. Intermediaries, please abstain. Poison was a procuress. The pistol a pimp. Each might betray her. One must stop buying novelettes about the bourgeois. One cannot kill a man with a cigar lighter, as some had apparently thought she had thought. Franz shook his head or nodded it, according to this or that turn of her earnest speech. The little room was brimming with sunlight. He was sitting on the window ledge. The panes were thrown open and secured with wedges of wood. In spite of its being a holiday, the builders were stubbornly at work, clinking and knocking higher and higher. A girl's voice cried something from a window below, and another girl's voice, still more angelic, responded from a balcony on the opposite side of the street. This was the season of guitar music on the river at home, of rafts gently singing in the shadow of the willows. His back began to feel hot. He slid off the window ledge onto the floor, with her legs tightly crossed, showing a strip of fat thigh under her skirt. Martha sat sideways at the table. In the inexorable light, her skin looked coarser and her face seemed broader, perhaps because her chin was propped on her fist. The corners of her damp lips were lowered, her eyes looked upward. A complete stranger within Franz's consciousness observed in passing that she really resembled a toad. Martha moved her head. Reality returned, and once again everything became oppressive, dark, and relentless. "Strangle him," she muttered. "If we could simply strangle him with our bare hands." The great Dr. Hertz had told her a couple of years before that her cardiogram showed a remarkable, not necessarily dangerous, but certainly incurable abnormality, which he had seen only in one other woman, a Hohenzollern, who was still alive at almost 40, and now it seemed to Martha that her heart was burst, unable to withstand the feeling of hatred that Dryer's every move and sound aroused in her. Sometimes at night, when he approached her with a tender little laugh, she felt an urge to dig her hands into his neck and squeeze with all her might, and vice versa. When on a recent occasion she had made him promise not to sell the best of his 3-apartment houses for this ridiculous price he was offered by Willie, and in generous compensation had offered him of her own accord a brief caress, his unexpected lack of maidenly response had revolted her as much as his advances. She realized how difficult it was in these circumstances to reason logically, to develop simple, smooth, elegant plans, when everything within her was screaming and raging, yet if she must survive, something had to be done. Dryer was spreading out monstrously before her, like a conflagration in a cinema picture. Human life, like fire, was dangerous and difficult to extinguish, but as in the case of fire, there must simply be, some universally accepted natural method of quenching a man's fierce life. Enormous, tawny-haired, tanned from tennis, wearing bright yellow pajamas, redly yawning, radiating heat and health, and making the various grunting noises that a man who cannot control his grossly physicality makes when waking up and stretching. Dryer filled the whole bedroom, the whole house, the whole world. More and more often, and with the recklessness she no longer noticed, Martha escaped from the triumphant presence into her lover's room, arriving even at hours when he was still at the store, and vibrant sounds of construction in the sky were not yet replaced by nearby radios, and would dart aside, her black brows sternly drawn together as she awaited his return, with confident and legitimate tenderness. Without his obedient lips and young body she could not live more than a single day. At that instant, in their meeting, when still feeling the receding ripples of pleasure, she would open her eyes. It seemed strange to her that Dryer had not been destroyed by her lover's thrusts. She would soon try to entice sluggish Franz anew, and having succeeded not without trouble, that job at the store exhausted the poor pet. She would feel again that Dryer was perishing, that each frantic stroke wounded him more deeply, and finally that he collapsed in terrible pain, howling, discharging his intestinal fluids, and dissolving in the unbearable splendor of her joy. Yet, as if nothing had happened, he would revive, walk noisily through all the rooms, cheerful and hungry, sit opposite her at meals, folding a slice of ham, spearing it with an energetic fork, and making a circular motion with his mustache as he chewed. "Help me, Franz, oh help me," she would murmur sometimes, shaking him by the shoulders. His eyes were totally submissive beyond their well-white lenses. However, he could not think of anything. His imagination was at her command. It was ready to work for her, but it was she who would have to give to his fancy its impulse and food. Outwardly, he had changed a great deal during these last months. He had lost weight, his protruding cheekbones made him look more than ever like a hungry Hindu. A curious debility blurred his movements, as if he were existing only because existing was the proper thing to do, but one did it unwillingly and would have been glad to return at any moment to a state of animal stupor. His day ran its course automatically, but his nights were formless and full of terror. He took sleeping pills. The morning jolt of his alarm clock was like a coin dropped into a vending machine. He would rise, shuffle to the smelly toilet, a little dark hell in its own right, shuffle back, wash his hands, brush his teeth, shave, wipe the soap from his ears, dress, walk to the subway station, get on a non-smoking car, read the same old advertisement, dirty overhead, and to the rhythm of its crude trotchi reach his destination, climb the stone staircase, squint at the mottled pansies in the bright sun on the large flower bed in front of the exit, across the street, and do everything in the store that he was supposed to do, returning home in the same way he would do once again all that was expected of him after her departure. He could read the newspaper for a quarter of an hour or so, because it was customary to read newspapers. They would walk over to his uncle's villa. At supper he would sometimes repeat what he had read in the paper, reproducing every other sentence verbatim, but strangely jumbling the facts in between, so the Dryer had fun in getting him on and then correcting him. Around 11 he would leave. He would make his way home, always along the same sidewalks. A quarter of an hour later he would be undressing. The light would go out. His thoughts were characterized by the same monotony as his actions, and their order corresponded to the orders of his day. Why was he stopped at the coffee? Why has he stopped the coffee? Can't flush it if the chain comes off every time. Dull blade. Biff Gates shaves with his collar on his public washroom. These white shorts are not practical. Today is the 9th, no the 10th, the 11th of June. She's again on the balcony, bare arms, parched geraniums. Train more crowded every morning. Clean your teeth with dentifile. Every minute you'll smile. There are fools who offer their seats to big, strong women. Clean your teeth with dentifile. Clean your minute with your smile. Out we file. And behind these regular everyday thoughts, as behind words written on glass, lay darkness, a darkness into which one ought not to peer. One was treated, however, to strange glimpses. Once it seemed to him that a police official, smelling strongly of cheese, with a briefcase under his arm, kept looking at him with suspicion from the opposite seat. His mother's letters contained terrifying insinuations. She maintained, for example, that he misspelled words or left them unfinished. At the store, the race of the rubber sea lion, intended for the amusement of bathers, began to resemble the face of Dryer, and Franz was glad when Miss Steller, Robb Avenue 1, had him pack it and send it to her. Catching a whiff of blooming lindens, he would remember nostalgically the schoolyard in his hometown, where they touched the bark of a lime in a game of tag. Once a young girl with bouncing breasts and a short red frock almost ran into him. She carried a bunch of keys in her hand, and he fancied he recognized her in a janitor's daughter that he had longed for many ages ago. There were many ephemeral glimpses of consciousness. He would instantly revert to semi-existence. Then at night, in his drugged sleep, something more significant would burst through. Together with naked Martha, he would be sawing off the head of Pifke in a public toilet, even though in the first place he was undistinguishable from the Dryer's head chauffeur, and in the second he was called Dryer in the language of dreams. Horror and helpless revulsion emerged in those nightmares with a certain non-terrestrial sensation known to those who have just died or have suddenly gone insane after deciphering the meaning of everything. Thus, in one dream, Dryer stood on a ladder, slowly winding a red photograph, and Franz knew that in a moment the phonograph would bark the word that solved the universe, after which the act of existing would become a futile, childish game like putting one's foot on every flag edge of every step. The phonograph would croon a familiar song about a sad person and the person's love, but by Dryer's expression and shifty eyes, Franz would understand that it was all a ruse, that he was being cleverly fooled, that within the song lurked the very word that must not be heard, and he would wake up screaming and could not identify a pale square in the distance until it became a pale window in the dark, and then he would drop his head on the pillow again. All at once Martha, her face dreadful, waxy, glossy, heavy-jowled, with the wrinkles of age and gray hair, would run in, grab him by the wrist, and drag him into a balcony suspended high above the street, and on the pavement below stood a policeman holding something in front of him and slowly growing, until his face reached the balcony, and holding a newspaper in a loud voice he read Franz's death sentence to him. His colleagues in their sports department, athletic swimmer and his effeminate Swedish friend, who now sold bathing suits, happened one day to notice his pallor and advised him to sunbathe on the banks of Grunwald Lake on Sundays, but an icy indolence hung upon Franz, and besides, an hour of leisure meant an hour with Martha. As for her, she mistook his moodiness for the malady from which she herself suffered, the white-hot fever of incessant murderous thought. It gladdened her when in Dryer's presence, upon meeting her gaze, Franz would sometimes start clenching and unclenching his hands, breaking matches or fiddling with his salt cellar. She believed that her death rays ran clear through him, and that she had only to stab him with that beam of light, and then a tense particle of his soul, where the imprisoned image of death lay hidden, would explode and make a gigantic Franz stamp on the crawling hornet. Conversely, she was irritated when Franz complained. She would shrug her shoulders and she listened to his muttering. "Don't you understand? He is insane," Franz would repeat. "I know he is insane." "Nonsense, not insane," said a little peculiar. "This is even an advantage. Stop twitching, please." "But it's horrible," Franz insisted. "He has stopped bringing me coffee, I don't know when, and then suddenly appeared with a bowl of red beef tea." "Oh, stop, who cares? He is quite harmless. He has a sick wife." Franz kept shaking his head. "One never sees her. I've rattled the door thousands of times to get him out of the toilet, but it's always he, not she. I don't like it. Silly, why, I tell you that's an advantage. Nobody snoops on us. It's my impression that we are very lucky in this respect." "God knows what goes on in that room of theirs," sighed Franz. "Such strange noises come from there sometimes. Not laughter, rather the clucking of a hen." "That will do," said Martha quietly. He stopped speaking, sitting naked on the edge of the bed and staring at the floor. "Oh, darling, darling," she said cheerlessly. and impetuously, "does this matter? Don't you feel the days are going by while we keep aimlessly discussing things, not knowing where to begin? Don't you see? This way we'll drive ourselves to the point where one fine day we'll simply pounce on him, tear him apart. We can't go on like that. We've got to think of something, and you know lately he's been so terribly alive. Is he stronger than we? Is he more alive than this, and this, and this?" But she was right. Oh, she was right. The old boy was aflame with rich life. He was young. His backhand was now as good as his forehand. His digestion was a dream. He would go to Brazil or Zanzibar next winter. Isolde was expensive and faithful, and every once in a while he perched himself erotically with her in the pretty little flat he had rented for both of the sisters. Ida, however, had been whisked away to Dresden by a jealous lover at a party given by a commercial consul in Luxembourg. Tall Martha, with her black silks, lovely shoulders, and emerald ear pendants, had eclipsed all the other ladies. He had decided to conceal from her, until the proper moment, his special project, although it was true that on 3 or 4 occasions he had hinted at a new extraordinary undertaking. But then again, how would he go about explaining to her what absorbed him? It was impossible. She would dismiss it as an inane whim. Mechanical mannequins indeed. What next? Pygmalion? You, Galatea. No, that was a hopeless line. She would say, "You're spending your time on rubbish." Yes, but what marvelous rubbish. He smiled at the thought that she too had her eccentricities. The iced rose water applied to her face at bedtime, those Hindu kitsch gymnastics nearly every day. He ran his cane clatteringly along the pale of a fence. They were walking along the sunlit side of the street. His companion, the black-bearded inventor, kept hinting that it might not be a bad idea to cross to the other shady sidewalk, but Dwyer did not listen. If he enjoyed the sun, others were bound to enjoy it too. "It's still quite a long way," sighed his companion. "Are you quite sure you don't want to walk?" "Quite sure you want to walk?" "With your permission," said Dwyer absent-mindedly, and quickened his pace. What fun it was to be alive! At that moment, for example, this black-bearded genius was taking him to see something most amusing. If he were to stop a passer-by and ask him, "Try to guess, friend, what I'm on my way to see, and why I must see it," the passer-by would never be able to answer. And as if that were not enough, all those people in the street scurrying by, waiting at streetcar stops. What a bunch of secrets, astonishing professions, incredible recollections. That fellow, for instance, with the cane and the very English yellow mustache, who knows, perhaps during the war he had been assigned a dreary and preposterous task of transmuting for national use sundry elements of captured enemy uniforms, but after 2 years of it the material had begun to dwindle, and he was sent to the front, where he enjoyed the exhilaration of at least one good battle among the ruins of a village once renowned for its hops and hogs, and the hostilities were suspended, and a last soldier was killed by a sack of Declaration of Peace leaflets dropped from an airplane. But why assigns one own memories to strangers? The old man there on the beach had been in his youth, oh, I don't know, perhaps a celebrated acrobat, or that black-bearded foreigner, rather a dull companion to between us, it was said, had perhaps made a spectacular invention. Nothing was known, and everything was possible. "To the right," said the dull companion, breathing heavily, "that building over there with the statues." In an annex to the courthouse, the police had staged an exhibition of crime. One respectable burglar, who suddenly, for no good reason, had dismembered a neighbor's child, was found to have in his apartment an artificial woman. She could walk, wring her hands, and make water, and was now in that police museum. Impelled by a professional anxiety, the inventor wanted to take a look at her. They were led to her by a retired gendarme who Dwyer bribed to make mechanism work. The poor woman turned out to be rather crudely made, and the mysterious substance of which the papers had spoken was, thank God, only gutta percha. Her power to move was also exaggerated. A clockwork device permitted her to close her glass eye and spread her legs. They could be filled up with hot water. Her body hair was real, and so were the brown locks falling over her shoulders. All things considered, there was nothing new about her. Merely a vulgar doll. The scornful and happy inventor left at once, but Dwyer, always afraid of missing something entertaining, scrolled through all the rooms. He examined the faces of the criminals, enlarged photographs of years, messy fingerprints, kitchen knives, ropes, faded sheets of clothing, dusty jars, dirty test tubes, 1,000 trivial articles that had been wronged. Again rows of photographs, the pasty faces of unwashed, badly dressed murderers, and the puffy faces of the victims who in death became to resemble them, and it was all so shabby, so stupid, that Dwyer could not help smiling. He was thinking what a talentless person one must be, what a poor thinker, a hysterical fool, to murder one's neighbor, the deathly grey of the exhibitous, the banality of the crime, the pieces of bourgeois furniture, a frightened little console in which a bloody imprint had been found, hazelnuts injected with strychnine, buttons, a tin basin, again photographs. All this trash expressed the very essence of crime. How much those simpletons were missing not only the wonders of everyday life, the simple pleasure of existence, but even such instants as this, the ability to look with curiosity upon what was essentially boring, and then the final bore. At dawn, breakfastless, pale, top-hatted city fathers Driving to the execution, the weather is cold and foggy. What it must feel in a top hat at 5 in the morning. The condemned man is led to the prison yard. The executioner's assistants plead with him to behave decently and not to struggle. And here's the axe. Presto! The audience is shown the severed head. What should a frock-coated burgher do when looking at it? Give it a nod of commiseration, a frown of reproach, a smile of encouragement, as if to say, see how simple and quick it all was? Dwyer caught himself thinking that it might be interesting to wake up at the crack of dawn, and through a shave and a hearty meal, go out in striped prison pajamas into the yard, touch the plump executioner's muscles with some appropriate joke, give the whole assembly a friendly wave of the hand, and give it a last good stare at the white official faces. Yes, all those faces are uncommonly pale. Here, for example, and it's a young chap who chopped his parents to death. How big-eared and pimply he is. He is a sullen gentleman who left a trunk at the station with his fiancée's corpse, and here is Dr. Guillotine's invention. Oh no, that is a medieval Swiss contraption of exactly the same type. Board, wooden collar, 2 uprights, the blade between them. Monsieur Guillotine, you are an impostor. Ah, the American dentist's chair. The dentist is masked. The patient also has a mask with holes for the eyes. They slit the trouser leg at the calf to attach the electrode. Aha! The current is turned on. Hop, hop, as over a bumpy road. What dreary fools! A collection of idiotic faces and tormented objects. It was lovely outside. A lush wind was blowing. The souls of passer-by left silver traces on the sun-glorified asphalt. How lovely, blue and fragrant our Berlin is in the summer. It wouldn't be bad by the sea, either. Those clouds are radiant vacation clouds, workmen lazily repairing the pavement. How good it all is! How amusing it would be, he thought, to search the faces of those workmen, those passers-by, for the facial expression he had just seen in the countless photographs, and to his surprise, in every one he met, Dwyer recognized a criminal, past, present, or future. Soon he was so carried away with this game that he began inventing a special crime for each. He watched a round-shouldered man with a suspicious suitcase. He went up to him and asked for a light. The man shook off the ashes of a cigarette and made the commonplace little connection, but Dwyer noticed how the hand trembled, and felt sorry that he could not reveal the detective's badge. Face after face slipped by, eyes avoided his, and even in plump, motherly housewives he distinguished the skeletons of murder. Thus he walked, spinning his cane like a propeller, having an exceptionally good time, grinning involuntarily at strangers, and noting with pleasure their momentary embarrassment. Then he grew tired of the game, felt hungry and thirsty, and quickened his step. As he drew near the gate, he noticed his wife and nephew in the garden. They were standing motionless side by side, watching him approach, and he felt a pleasant relief at seeing at last 2 familiar, 2 perfectly human faces.